From claims of healings and visions to the world's most inexplicable events, whether you're a believer or a skeptic, the truth is always worth the hunt.
EWTN Radio presents The Miracle Hunter with Michael O'Neill.
Welcome to the Miracle Hunter radio show on EWTN Radio. This is Michael O'Neill on The Miracle Hunter. Hey everyone, I hope you had a good St. Patrick's Day there. I celebrated in a big way myself, and we're going to keep the trend going, talking about Irish saints. We're going to be speaking today with Father John Hogan with his brand new book about Irish future saints. It's something similar to my They Might Be Saints, where I write about Americans on the path to sainthood. But what about those people from Ireland who might be future saints? And so the name of this new book is called The Rock from Which You Were Hewn. It's a book available from Ignatius Press, so we'll be excited to talk with Father John Hogan later in the show. And one of the most interesting mystical phenomena around, many people, Catholics, Protestants, and otherwise, are fascinated by this strange phenomena of the stigmata. In this past year, we celebrated the 800th anniversary of the very first person in history to receive the stigmata, and that's, of course, St. Francis of Assisi. And along those lines, we have a new book that's out called God's Wounds, The Remarkable Truth of Those Who Bore the Signs of Christ's Passion, and that is written by John F. Clark. So we'll be excited to talk with John later in the show. And check out my programs, They Might Be Saints, which airs every week on EWTN. This week, they'll be airing the episode about Father Michael McGivney, and that is, of course, the founder of the Knights of Columbus. And a truly remarkable miracle was covered in that episode, where we interviewed the family who had the birth of a son with fetal hydrops, a condition that's expected 100% fatality, and he lived through the intercession of the great saint, the great founder of the Knights of Columbus, Father Michael McGivney. So check that one out this week. And also this week, we'll be looking at the Explore episode of Legace. On Saturday, March 29th, we'll be airing the episode related to Legace, that place in France where Benedicta Rencourel, in the year 1664, the Virgin Mary gave her messages about prayer for the conversion of sinners and visited her throughout the rest of her life. And that's Explore Legace, airing on Saturday, March 29th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And for those people who want to go beyond just watching the programs and where I travel around the world to film these projects for EWTN, they can join me actually in Italy coming up for a Jubilee Year pilgrimage. I'll be going to Milan, Turin, Florence, and Rome. We'll be going for the canonization of Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. The dates on that are July 28th through August 4th. And of course, we'll be going to places of saints and miracles like we always do. We'll see the Marian apparition sites there. We'll visit the Duomo in Milan. We'll visit Turin to see the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, where the Shroud of Turin is held, and walk in the footsteps of Pier Giorgio Frassati and see the place where St. John Bosco had his famous visions. We'll go to Florence, home to many great artists, including we'll seeing Michelangelo's David, as well as other great works of art. And we'll see the site of the apparition of Mary to the 7 holy founders of the Serbites. And we'll finish up in Rome to see the many incredible sites around the Vatican, finishing with the canonization of one of the great modern saints, and that's Pier Giorgio Frassati. Sign up, find out more at pilgrimages.com/miraclehunter. Later in the show, we're going to be looking at the Might Be Saint of the Day. For today's date, we've got Blessed Marian Gorecki from Poland, who lived from 1903 to 1940. The 365 Days with Mary project for today, March 22nd, is Our Lady of Sorrows from Castel Petroso in Italy in the year 1888. And the question of the week, what is the status at the Vatican of Our Lady of Champion? We'll see what we can do to answer that question in just a little bit. Let's take a look at the miracle news. We do this every week where we talk about the miracles happening around the world and those things that relate to miracles. And unfortunately, this is one of these cases where we have some sad news to report. You may have heard of this, but Archbishop Joseph F. Naumann of Kansas City has filed an emergency motion asking the local district court to order the Satanists planning a worship ritual at the state capitol to return any consecrated Eucharistic hosts and wine in their possession. And the group is planning a satanic worship ritual called a Black Mass at the Kansas State Capitol on March 28th, in which they intend to desecrate the Eucharist and the precious blood, according to the court motion filed seen by CatholicVote.com or .org. And according to that motion, the defendants are boasting both online and to the Kansas Catholic Conference Executive Director Chris Weber that they have secured a consecrated host and plan to desecrate it. This is very sad news. Please pray for that district court order to go through and for that host to be returned. And this is a great thing to pray for, and some very sad news to report. Let's take a look at Catholic Pub Trivia. We do this every week. We ask a trivia question, give it a prize to an emailer that writes in the fastest with correct answer. And last week we were talking about St. Patrick, with St. Patrick's Day upon us, and it was we answered the very interesting question that most, even Irish Catholics, don't know. This answer is one of 5 patron saints of Ireland. St. Bridget is another. Can you name any of the other 3? And the patron saints of Ireland include St. Patrick, St. Bridget, St. Columba, St. Brendan the Navigator, and St. Columcille. And the winner writing in the fastest was Linda K. Watros. Thank you, Linda, for writing in. You are the winner of the prize, the image of the faces of Mary. And this week's question, see if you can get this one. Who was the first saint with the stigmata in the 20th century? If you think you know that answer and want to win the prize, the image of the faces of Mary, send me an email to questions@miraclehunter.com, and the fastest respondent with the right answer is going to win that prize, and answers and winners will be posted on the show page on miraclehunter.com. We need to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to be speaking with Father John Hogan, author of The Rock from Which You Were Hewn. We'll be talking about future Irish saints. Stay with us for that.
Now, back to the Miracle Hunter on EWTN. Here's Michael O'Neill.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Miracle Hunter radio show on EWTN Radio. This is Michael O'Neill. I'm the Miracle Hunter. People who tune into this show, or perhaps my television series, They Might Be Saints, know that I love to focus on people on the path to sainthood, future saints, you might say, or might be saints. Perhaps we're focused on servants of God, venerables, blesseds, before they have all their miracles as recognized by Rome and are declared saints in our church. And people may have picked up my book called They Might Be Saints, Americans on the Path to Sainthood. And this details the lives of 24 Americans, venerables and blesseds, and gives some biography of them. But there's another book that's out that I was really excited about. I'm an Irish guy myself with an O apostrophe on my last name. So there's a new book that is very similar in the sense, or a parallel book, you might say. And it's about the people of Irish background who are on that path to sainthood. And the name of the book is The Rock from Which You Were Hewn, The Lives and Legacy of Holy Irish Men and Women. And it's out from Ignatius Press. And it is co-authored or co-edited by Father John Hogan and Dr. Patrick Kenny. And so we're so excited to welcome one of those co-editors to the show today, Father John Hogan. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, it's great to connect with you, and this is of great interest of mine to talk about people on the path to sainthood. And in this book about people from Ireland on this path is exciting to me. Tell me a little bit about how this book came to be.
The book is a response to Pope Benedict's letter to the Irish, which came out following the many scandals which were exposed in recent years. And in the letter, Pope Benedict spoke to the Irish Church, and he encouraged us to deal with the problems that have arisen from abuse. But he also asked us to look to the legacy of holiness that many Irish people have left, and to see in the legacy they offer us a means to go forward and to renew and to address the crimes of the past. So it's a beautiful suggestion from the Pope, and he quoted from Isaiah. He told us to remember the rock from which we're hewn. And as we look back to our history as Irish people, we see in the distant past many hundreds of Irish saints, most of them local, but also in more recent times, extraordinary men and women who have lived, who have served the church, who have served their brothers and sisters with great holiness and diligence. And so we decided, well, maybe we should look at these people and present them again to the people in the Irish church and beyond, because we need to take Pope Benedict's suggestion seriously if we are to go forward. And so we decided that there are a number of causes in progress. Unfortunately, many of them are not moving as quickly as they should. So we decided that we would promote those causes, we would present the people involved in those causes. And then, because there are many others in Ireland who have a reputation for holiness, and for whom causes have not been opened yet, we decided to include some of them. So to give a full picture of, I suppose, the legacy of holiness that exists in our country. And we decided to offer candidates from the recent centuries, actually most of them are from the 20th century and coming into the 21st century, to remind people in Ireland and beyond that holiness is not something in the past, but it is something that exists today, is a vital force within the church today. And of course, if we are dealing with the wrongs of the past, we must remember that legacy of holiness today can help us move forward.
That's a brilliant way to do this, and I think it inspires people in today's world that know that saints can walk among us, and we can all be saints. And so I think that inspiration is found in this new book, The Rock from Which You Were Hewn. And the book presents 40 biographies of Irish men and women whose causes are underway, and others, as you mentioned. And I think that some names might be familiar to American listeners, especially when we talk about Venerable Patrick Peyton. I did a television series about him, where I know that Father Willie Doyle was featured on EWTN as well. Talk a little bit about some of your favorites that were included in this book and that you perhaps learned more about when you put together the book.
Oh, there's many favourites in this book. I suppose as the postulator for the cause of Father Willie Doyle, he is certainly there. He's a great inspiration. We're working on his cause at the moment. A man of great humanity, of great holiness, and great courage as he died on the battlefield of the First World War, Passchendaele in Belgium. But among the others, you mentioned Father Patrick Peyton. We were putting the book together. It was people born in Ireland, and of course that means that some of these Irish people, these Irish saints, emigrated. So, we have Father Peyton, we have Father Patrick Ryan, we have Margaret Mary Healy, who founded a congregation in Texas, and many others. So if I was to highlight a couple, for me, there are two who really strike me. I wrote the biographies for them because I was really inspired by them. The first is a laywoman, the Venerable Edel Quinn. Those listeners who are members of the Legion of Mary will know all about Edel, a woman who was afflicted with very poor health, but had the most extraordinary personality again, and this vitality which emerged from the depth of her faith, and joining the Legion of Mary when she couldn't enter into a convent. She found an outlet for her apostolic desires. And she carried out great work in Ireland, particularly in Dublin, as a member of the Legion of Mary. But then when the position of an envoy to East Africa was proposed, she wanted it. And even though many were against her going because at this stage in her life she was suffering pretty badly from TB, the founder of the Legion of Mary, Frank Duff, supported her, and she won that nomination. And for the last few years of her life, she basically blazed the trail in East Africa, promoting the Legion of Mary, empowering the laity, the African laity, to take their place in the church, and also to work as a missionary proclaiming the gospel. So she's a great example of this dynamic Christian womanhood, a woman who faced many challenges but didn't let them destroy the work she wanted to do, who dealt with ill health in the most heroic way, and leaves a wonderful legacy of holiness. The second person really inspires me. His cause has not been opened yet. He was a former bishop of our diocese, Bishop William Walsh, and he lived around the time of the Reformation. And he started his life wanting to be a Cistercian monk. So he entered a monastery in our diocese, Bective Monastery, to live a life of prayer and solitude, unfortunately, that was destroyed by the Reformation, and his monastery was dissolved by Henry VIII. He eventually found himself in exile in Rome, where he became a secretary to the future Archbishop of Canterbury, Reginald Pole. And when Henry VIII died and his son, Edward, Queen Mary became the monarch. And so he came back to England and to Ireland and began to revitalise the Diocese of Meath. And he was elected bishop and lived a life of extraordinary holiness. People who looked at him as bishop, they believed he never committed a mortal sin in his life. Such was the innocence and purity of his life. But he was also very, very strong. And when Mary died and Elizabeth I assumed the throne, he very much resisted the Protestant settlement that was being imposed on Ireland. And in fact, he stood up in his cathedral and he denounced the efforts to turn Ireland Protestant again. For that, he was sent to prison and spent many years languishing in a cell in Dublin Castle. He eventually escaped and died on the continent. But he's one of these important figures from the Reformation that aren't really known, and a man who had to face, again, challenges in his life and kind of decisions that were made for him, and he had to accept and deal with. I said he wanted a quiet life of prayer and solitude, but he found himself in the middle of numerous battles and controversies. So I think he's a good example for us today, because we find ourselves involved in so many controversies and our life of faith can be disturbed. And yet this man managed to hold his peace and yet remain strong and endure much suffering and imprisonment. So I think those two people stand out for me, but there are many others. There's Augustus Fabius Child, Little Nellie of Holy God, as she's called, or Ellen Organ, who died at the age of 4. But in those few short years has really inspired many people through her faith, her prayer, her love of Jesus and the Blessed Sacrament. Her legacy even reached Pope Pius X, and it was because of her example that he decided to lower the age for children to receive communion at the age of 7. Nellie suffered from illness all her life, and she wanted to receive Holy Communion. Because she was only 4, the parish priest said, well, she can't receive it, she's too young. So, which is going to be very interesting if a cause is opened. He decided to do an examination of her to discover if she had reached the age of reason, because you have to reach the age of reason before you receive the sacrament.
Right. And
he discovered at the age of 4, this child had actually reached the age of reason, hence she received her first Holy Communion to utter delight. And of course that examination by the priest will come in very handy, because there's now talk of her cause actually being opened. So hopefully that will go forward. And one of the important points that will have to be established before her cause can be opened is, has she reached the age of reason?
Great.
And we already have the evidence that she did. And
that's beautiful. And she would be the youngest saint at this point if she...
She would be the youngest non-martyr saint.
Yes, correct. Youngest non-martyr saint. We've been talking today with Father John Hogan about his new book, The Rock from Which You Were Hewn. It's a new book out from Ignatius Press about Irish men and women on the path to sainthood. And this is a very exciting book for me. It's very similar to my efforts with They Might Be Saints, where we look at the Americans on the path to sainthood. This is quite a book that not only presents the lives of these people so that people can connect with them and see them as models of faith, but they can pray to them and move their causes along, perhaps. Father, when we talk about some of these causes are very early, perhaps they haven't even been launched yet, but there are others who are venerables and blesseds already listed in your book. If someone were to read your book and be inspired by one of these saints, or future saints, what would be what would happen next? How could we help these future saints along the path to sainthood?
Well, prayer is vital. So pray. What I would suggest is you get in touch with the promoter of the cause. A lot of these people, we have some addresses in the book. Others can be tracked down online. And get a prayer card, get in contact with them, and maybe get a few prayer cards, actually, and spread them among people that you know. Because the causes aren't moving, they miss a vital element, which are miracles. We've a number of the most extraordinary people who are venerable, Venerable Nan O'Nagel and Venerable Catherine Macaulay and Venerable Matt Talbot, and they are waiting on miracles. And what I would suggest is that if you want to highlight one, pray for a miracle. Go to people who are sick and introduce them to this particular candidate and tell them to pray for a miracle to this person. Now, it's important that they pray only to them, because one of the problems that we have is that sometimes when somebody is sick or whatever, they pray to so many people. And if a miracle is granted, then you don't know who has granted the miracle, or to whose intercession the miracle has been granted. And that leaves the church with a problem, because that miracle then it cannot be presented for examination, because there has to be a clear attribution. So what I would suggest is, if you're praying for someone for a miracle, to someone for a miracle, you make sure it's clearly attributable to that person. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why some of these causes have not advanced. And it could be true in the US, maybe it's in Ireland, because in Ireland there are certain people who are already saints who are very popular. And so when somebody is ill, and say, for example, prayer cards for Nan O'Neill or Catherine Macaulay or Matt Talbot are brought, others are brought as well. And so I sometimes think that miracles really aren't granted, because God wants to grant these miracles, but they have to be clearly attributed. So that's what I would suggest to those who are going to pray.
Absolutely. The name of the book is The Rock from Which You Were Hewn, The Lives and Legacy of Holy Irish Men and Women, co-authored by Dr. Patrick Kenny and our guest today, Father John Hogan. And Father, as we wrap up the program today, and people can get this book at Ignatius Press or anywhere Catholic books are sold, and this is a book for people in Ireland and people of Irish heritage like myself and others. What is your hope for those people who come across your book, pick this book up, and learn about these great future saints?
I hope they will be inspired. I hope they will see in these people, first of all, friends and companions for their lives. I hope they will learn many lessons, see heroism at work, see humility, see creativity, see hope, which we need for the time in which we live. I would also hope that people will be inspired to live a life of holiness themselves. Sometimes we're told that the gospel cannot be lived. It is so lofty, we cannot reach it. But in this book, we see ordinary men and women, and even a child, who became holy, who teach us that the gospel can be lived in our daily lives. And there are people from every walk of life here. So whoever picks up this book, if it's a layman or a laywoman, a child, a priest, a bishop, that they will be inspired to seek holiness in their own way of life. And that's important for the church, you see, because the church is holy, but she needs her children to be holy as well, for evangelical reasons as much as for our own salvation.
Beautiful. Well, we're so grateful to you, Father John Hogan, co-author of the book, The Rock from Which You Were Hewn, The Lives and Legacy of Holy Irish Men and Women, available now from Sophia Institute Press. Thank you so much, Father John, for joining us on today's program.
Thank you very much. God bless you.
God bless. That was Father John Hogan talking to us about Irish men and women along the path to sainthood. You've got a whole book of 40 Irish men and women, their biographies featured in this book, The Rock from Which You Were Hewn, available from Ignatius Press. You can buy that online there or anywhere Catholic books are sold. We need to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to be looking at the question of the week. Stay with us for that.
Now, back to the Miracle Hunter on EWTN. Here's Michael O'Neill.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Miracle Hunter radio show on EWTN Radio. This is Michael O'Neill. I'm the Miracle Hunter. I love getting your questions. People write in from around the world with questions about miracles happening in today's world and those that have happened centuries ago. And of course, I love talking about Marian apparitions, and I think it's pretty notable that we have a Marian apparition here in the United States, of course, from 1859, Champion, Wisconsin. I was there for the day when they announced this as a true apparition of the Virgin Mary. The local bishop, David L. Ricken, gave that pronouncement, making it the first and only case in the history of the United States, and it remains that way to this day. And so I got an email from someone from Wisconsin. This is Mike F., who writes in. He says, Dear Miracle Hunter, I believe the status of Robinsonville, now Champion, listed as bishop approved on your website is now a Vatican approved site. And it's the only approved Marian apparition in the United States, Our Lady of Champion. Thank you, Mike. Well, thanks, Mike, for your question. And it's a good one, and it's a little bit tricky, especially considering the Vatican has changed its norms for giving apparition approval. And this Our Lady of Champion apparition is one of the very few cases in the entire world where we see an approval by a local bishop without any kind of approval from the Vatican. And so it seems that the Vatican has no intention of relitigating or reinvestigating these few cases. We have Our Lady of Akita in Japan, Our Lady of Champion in Wisconsin, Our Lady of San Nicolas in Argentina, and there's a very small number of these cases where we see a full approval according to the old norms, the 1978 norms, which say only the local bishop needs to be the one who declares something to be supernatural. The Vatican doesn't usually need to weigh in. And how does the Vatican typically weigh in? Well, they could do something like they could send a golden rose from the Pope to the shrine. The Pope himself could visit the shrine. There could be an establishment of a feast day for the Universal Church or the canonization of a visionary. There's a handful of ways that the Catholic Church shows its signs of recognition even without making a formal statement coming out of the Vatican. But none of those have happened yet at Our Lady of Champion in Wisconsin. So it sits in this interesting middle area right now, this gray area. It is a fully approved Marian apparition. Again, the Vatican has no intent of reinvestigating it or coming out with any kind of a new judgment. But according to the new norms, the highest level that the Vatican can give towards an apparition is that of nihil obstat. Nothing stands in the way. And that's certainly well beyond the point of where it is right now. This is a fully approved Marian apparition according to the old norms of 1978. So, to answer your question, Mike, yes, it is still a bishop-approved apparition. The Vatican has never commented in any kind of a way calling it Vatican-approved. I imagine at some point they'll apply the new norms to the case in Champion and give it a sign of full approval. But currently, we can only call it a bishop-approved, which is fully approved. So we should be pretty happy about that. Thanks so much, Mike, for your question. And if you have a question for the Miracle Hunter, you can send me an email to miraclehunter or questions@miraclehunter.com, and maybe I'll be answering your question on the air next week. Let's take a look at the 365 Days with Mary project. We do this every week where we talk about the Marian devotion of the day that lines up exactly to the day's date. We all know February 11th, Lourdes, or May 13th, Fatima, or December 12th, Guadalupe. But believe it or not, for each day of the calendar year, there's a different Marian devotion that lines up exactly to that day's date. And we're talking about feast days, the occasion of miracles, or perhaps the building of a basilica or dedication to that basilica. In some way, we see Mary being honored on each day of the year all around the world. And so for Day's Day, we've got the apparition of Our Lady of Sorrows from Castel Petroso in Italy in the year 1888. And the story goes that on March 22nd, 1888, two women, Fabiana Cecchino and Serafina Giovanni Valentino, were sent to look for some sheep that had strayed on a neighboring hill. And they had a vision of Mary, first as the Pietà and later as Our Lady of Sorrows, in a cave in Castel Petroso in Italy. They returned home in tears and reported the vision to the disbelieving townspeople. And a spring appeared at the apparition site in May of 1888, and this water has been used by the faithful as the same way they do at Lourdes, and many favors are piously believed to have been received. Monsignor Macarone Palmieri, the bishop of the Diocese of Bolzano, skeptical at first, witnessed an apparition 3 times during his investigation. And so that is Our Lady of Sorrows from Castel Petroso in Italy in 1888. For more information on this fascinating devotion, or any of the hundreds of other Marian devotions from around the world, you can go to 365dayswithmary.com. You can pick up the book or download the free app from the iOS App Store, 365 Days with Mary, Marian Calendar. Let's take a look at the sainthood news. We do this every week. We always talk about those people who might be saints, those people along the path to sainthood, servant of God, venerable, blessed before they become saints. They have all their miracles and become saints. And so we have in sainthood news on Monday, February 24th, last month, during the audience granted to His Eminence Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Secretary of State, the Holy Father, Pope Francis, authorized the dicastery for the cause of saints to promulgate a decree regarding the heroic virtue of the servant of God, Didaco Bassi, diocesan priest, founder of the Congregation of the Dominican Sisters of Santa Maria del Rosario, born on February 5th, 1856, in Lollo, in Italy, and died there on May 25th, 1919. He was a diocesan priest. He was an exemplary figure of a parish priest and founder, well placed in the wake of pastors who spent their lives serving the flock of faithful entrusted to him. He was a man devoted to prayer, especially before the Blessed Sacrament, so much so that he was defined as a prayer who incessantly propagated devotion to the Eucharist and the Virgin Mary. And that is Venerable Didaco Bassi, and now with one miracle he will be Blessed Didaco, and with two miracles he'll be Saint Didaco. And that is the sainthood news for today. And if we look at the might-be saint of the day, we always look for people on the path to sainthood whose feast day or death anniversary has lined up exactly to the day's date. For today's date, we have Blessed Marian Gorecki, who lived from 1903 to 1940 in Poland. And March 22nd is the solemnity. He's the son of Tomas and Petronella Gorecki, and he joined the army at age 17 to fight in the Polish Bolshevik War. And following his service, he entered the seminary, graduating with honors and being ordained on July 1st, 1928. He was the curate in Leszno in Poland and prefect of the seminary in Kozmin and Wolszyn. And he was assigned in 1933 to work with the Polish community in Gdansk in Poland, serving as chaplain to several organizations. In 1939, on September 1st, the day Nazi Germany invaded Poland, Father Bronislaw and other priests were arrested, beaten, and sent to a series of concentration camps. They were executed for being actively Catholic. He is a martyr. He was shot on Good Friday, March 22, 1940, in a field outside the Stutthof concentration camp near Stutowo-Pomorski in Poland in 1946, and he and others in the mass grave were exhumed and reburied in a cemetery in the Gdansk district of Zaspa in Poland. He was declared venerable in 1999 by Pope John Paul II in a decree of martyrdom and beatified on June 13, 1999. That's all by Pope John Paul II. And this is Blessed Marian Gorecki from Poland with one more miracle. He will be declared Saint Marian Gorecki. For those people who want to follow my project, They Might Be Saints, you can pick up the book, They Might Be Saints, available at EWTN Religious Catalog, which is EWTNRC.com, or you can tune in to the program which airs every week on EWTN. They Might Be Saints this week, on April 1st, we'll be doing an episode or airing the episode on Father Michael McGivney, the founder of the Knights of Columbus. So check that one out, Tuesday, April 1st. They Might Be Saints. We need to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to be talking with John F. Clark about his brand new book, God's Wounds, the remarkable truth of those who bore the signs of Christ's Passion. Stay with us for that.
Now, back to the Miracle Hunter on EWTN. Here's Michael O'Neill.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Miracle Hunter radio show on EWTN Radio. This is Michael O'Neill. I'm the Miracle Hunter. When we talk about some of the extraordinary mystical phenomena in the history of the Catholic Church, one thing that people point to, Catholics and otherwise, are the wounds of Christ, known as the stigmata. In just this past year, where we've begun celebrating, as of September 17th, anyway, the 800th anniversary of the stigmata of St. Francis of Assisi. So that was September 17th, 1224, and 800 years later, we're marking that anniversary with some content about this mystical phenomenon. And I'm doing a documentary, about the stigmata. And one of the guests in that, or one of the experts in that documentary, is John F. Clark. And he's the author of a brand new book called God's Wounds, the remarkable truth of those who bore the signs of Christ's Passion. And we're excited to welcome to the show today, John F. Clark. Welcome, John.
Thanks so much, Michael. Good to be here.
Yeah, this is an exciting book. I'm glad you put this together. I think this phenomenon of stigmata is something that's caught the eyes of a lot of people, and perhaps it's misunderstood to some extent, but there's a great deal of questions that people have related to this mystical phenomena that seems to point to a divine reality. If people on earth are receiving the wounds of Christ, doesn't that sort of validate in some ways all that we believe in? So stigmata is sort of an important concept, but for a lot of people, this is mysterious and unknown. So I should ask you right out of the gate, what is stigmata?
Okay. So Father John Hardin actually gives a really good definition. He says he defines stigmata as a phenomenon in which a person bears all or some of the wounds of Christ in his or her own body, typically on the feet, hands, side, and or head. And what happens is that the wounds appear spontaneously. That is to say, we talk about mystical stigmata. The wounds appear spontaneously, but they are real wounds that have no apparent external source, and typically there is a flow of fresh blood. There are some, not all stigmatas are the same. Everything's a little bit different. So, for instance, St. Catherine de' Ricci had a shoulder stigmata, a shoulder wound. St. Rita very famously had a thorn in her head. Whenever you see a picture of St. Rita, you see her with that very prominent thorn in her head, obviously in imitation of the crown of thorns. And as you mentioned, the best-known stigmatic was St. Francis of Assisi in 1224. And he had what we call the 5 main wounds. So that would be the hands, the feet, and the side, the 5 main wounds. When I started researching this book, I thought that perhaps there were, a handful of stigmatists. St. Francis' story is pretty well known. Padre Pius is pretty well known. Well, as it turns out, there are over 300 cases of people who have had the stigmata, and about 70 of them have been canonized. So it was far beyond what I thought. The numbers came back to be quite a bit in excess of what I thought they would be, and each one of them has a fascinating story.
Absolutely. We're talking today with John F. Clark, the author of God's Wounds, The Remarkable Truth of Those Who Bore the Signs of Christ's Passion. And when you talk about the variability of the stigmata, the wounds in the hands and some, the lash marks on the back or on the shoulder or the crown of thorns or different sets of wounds on different people, what does that mean as far as, I think a lot of people would say, well, shouldn't all the wounds match up? Shouldn't all the stigmatics have the same number of wounds or at the very least in the same locations, the hands versus the wrists? What do we make of sort of this variability in stigmata cases?
Well, it's a really great question, and we have to remember that it's a mystery, and so we're sort of guessing. I know Aquinas, when writing in the Summa, he talks about much of theology comes down to properness. It is proper that. And so when I research this very question, it's a terrific question. I think what it comes down to is that the wounds of our Lord would have been impossible for us to suffer all of, right? Without, certainly tremendous grace. And so I think what God is doing there is highlighting, in some cases just one, in some cases highlighting many. And ultimately, I think what he's trying to do is bring others closer to him. And so why did St. Rita only have the thorn? Well, the interesting thing about it is when we say, why was it only this? Well, there was a pretty painful wound. When you read about her suffering, it was incredibly intense. Imagine having a terrible migraine headache for decades. I mean, it was very intense. In terms of the differences, again, that's a mystery for us. But we also have to remember that God doesn't typically send miracles that are identical in other areas, right?
Correct.
So different saints have experienced different miracles, and I think the stigmata is very similar in that respect to other miracles.
Yeah, absolutely. You can even look at Marian apparitions. We could say, wouldn't it be convenient if God only appeared to shepherd, or Mary appeared to shepherd children, and that we would know that was the way it would be authentic, but she doesn't. She appears to popes and men and women of all ages, including young people, famously the young people, of course, but the L miracles are a little bit different. So that's an excellent point that you bring out. We're talking today with John F. Clark about God's Wounds, his brand new book about stigmata in this 800th year of the anniversary of St. Francis's stigmata, the very first, famously. And when we talk about, you talked about the why of the stigmata, why would God grant this? But when you looked at the stigmata, what was the effect on you as a person? I know this is a very somewhat strange and difficult topic to tackle. When you really dug into it and when you learned more, what effect did it have on you?
Well, it's a great question. So I think that first and foremost, I began to look at the crucifix in a new way. So when I started doing the research for this book, to answer the whys of the stigmata, you really have to go back to the first stigmata. The first, that is the wounds borne by our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, right? So we have to go back and look at that. So I looked at the crucifixion extensively. I looked at Roman crucifixion. And Roman crucifixion was very scientific, the way that they did it. The Roman crucifixion was essentially done in such a way that people who were being crucified were beaten almost to death. That was their plan. The Roman soldiers were taught how to beat someone almost to death. It was almost like a game for them. And it's interesting that, when the movie The Passion of the Christ came out years ago, many movie critics thought it was too much. It was too violent. It was too gory. But as I researched more and more, sources of the Passion of Jesus, it was far worse than it was portrayed on screen. And so I think that how it affected me, when I would look at, when I go into church and see a crucifix, it's heavily sanitized. Most crucifixes bear almost no blood. But by the time Jesus was on the cross, he would have been drenched in blood. And at first, that sort of bothered me. Like, this isn't fair to him. He suffered much more than we're seeing here. But I came to accept the fact that, well, it would be very jarring for us to see that. But that became clear to me, another reason why our Lord allows his saints to have the stigmata or grants the mystical stigmata to them, because they are a physical representation of the suffering that our Lord endured. And I think the more I thought about that, the more you really fall in love with them. And when you read the stories of, St. Catherine of Siena, St. Teresa of Avila, St. Lidwine, I just found myself falling in love with them. These are people that tremendously love Jesus, and I felt so much called to get so closer to our Lord through his passion.
Absolutely. We're talking today with John F. Clark about his great new book called God's Wounds, and it's a look at the phenomena of stigmata. And it's something that has opened people's eyes over the years to this incredible reality. Now, you mentioned that perhaps there are more than 300 cases in Christian history, maybe 70 of those cases. We see the result of resulting in a canonized saint. When they look at canonizations, do they look at the stigmata and say, that being Rome, when they grant somebody the honor of canonization, do they look and do they say, this is a sign that God has marked this person? Is this something that would lead the way to canonization, or is this something that they consider on the side, perhaps?
So it's a really interesting question. And so to answer that, what you have to do is go back and look at the texts that are involved in the research that the Vatican did to prior to the canonization itself. In the case of St. Francis, it's mentioned, but typically the miracle of the stigmata is not mentioned as first and foremost as we might think it might be. But again, it's not necessarily. I don't believe it's the Holy Father's job to go and look at all of these different things and sort of categorize miracles. Now, of course, there are miracles necessary for canonization.
Yes.
Typically there are miracles necessary for those. And I think that what happens is that the fact that somebody seems to have the stigmata, seems to have the mystical stigmata, I think in some cases that sort of opens the file, for lack of a better term, right?
Sure.
Whether that is specifically highlighted in the text of canonization, it can be a little bit different story. But I think that ultimately that does actually give rise to opening the investigation in the first place.
Absolutely. I think that it can draw people towards interest in the saint, perhaps get them to investigate the heroic virtue of the saint, but it is not an intercessory miracle that would be used for the canonization of the saint. So very, very fascinating, these cases of saints who have the stigmata. And then we have a handful of others who are not saints who have the stigmata. So that's perhaps even more complicated how the church deals with those. So we've been talking today with John Clark, author of God's Wounds, The Remarkable Truth of Those Who Bore the Signs of Christ's Passion. And for those people interested in this book, John, what do you hope that they'll get from this book when they pick it up? And what's the best place for them to go to get it?
So the best place to go is CatholicAnswers.com, and you can go to the Catholic Answers store. That'd be the best way to get it. Should be out within a couple of weeks there. My hope for the book is that it edifies the faith of the faithful. And I think that is one of the key things about the stigmata itself, is to edify the faith of the faithful. I also hope that it counsels the doubtful. We live in a time when the faith is, very openly questioned. So I hope that it counsels the doubtful, because there are just so many stories that I think will accomplish that. And I also hope that it speaks to those who don't know Christ yet. I think that this is such a fascinating story from a scientific and medical perspective that I'm hoping that people will pick up the book to read about that side of it. Well, even if they think, well, this didn't really happen, what does this guy have to say? Kind of interesting. I mean, there's so much there. And I think one of the things, too, that I think people will take away from it is how to practice apologetics. So when we talk about miracles, I spend a lot of space in the book discussing what is evidence. When we say evidence, when we look at any case, when we're trying to examine anything, what evidence do you have? What evidence do you have against? And I really go through and spend a lot of time doing that. So that way, not only can we as Catholics provide an apologetics for the stigmata, but for other miracles we discuss. You mentioned Marian apparitions. What evidence do we have? Well, as it turns out, we have a lot of that. By the time we're talking about miracles, many of us are speaking about miracles we believe in. There's a lot of evidence there from a scientific perspective, an observational perspective. So I hope that that's a takeaway from this as well.
Wonderful. Well, we're so grateful to you, John Clark, for joining us today talking about your new Catholic Answers book, God's Wounds, The Remarkable Truth of Those Who Bore the Signs of Christ's Passion. Thanks so much for joining us on today's program.
Thanks, Mike. God bless.
God bless. That was John Clark. Check out his book, John F. Clark, God's Wounds, The Remarkable Truth of Those Who Bore the Signs of Christ's Passion, and that's available from Catholic Answers. And that's all the time we have for today's show. If you missed any of this episode or want to catch up on past episodes, you can go to EWTN.com/radio or download the EWTN app. I'd like to thank our guest today, Father John F. Clark, author of God's Wounds, The Remarkable Truth of Those Who Bore the Signs of Christ's Passion, and Father John Hogan, talking to us about the rock from which you were hewn, talking about those Irish sainthood causes that are underway. Check out my pilgrimage if you go to pilgrimages.com/miraclehunter. For this Jubilee year, I'll be going July 28th through August 4th to Rome, Milan, Florence, and Turin. We'll see the Marian apparition sites of Italy, visiting the Duomo in Milan. We'll visit Turin to see the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, where the Shrine of Turin is held, and walk in the footsteps of Pier Giorgio Frassati and see the place where St. John Bosco had his famous visions. We'll go to Florence, home to many great artists. We'll see the David and other great works of art, as well as the site of the apparition of Mary to the 7 holy founders of the Servites. And we'll finish up in Rome to see the many incredible sites around the Vatican, and finish with the canonization of one of the great modern saints, that's Pier Giorgio Frassati. So sign up, find out more at pilgrimages.com/miraclehunter. I'd like to thank you for joining me today on Miracle Hunter, where from claims of healings and visions to the world's most inexplicable events, whether you're a believer or a skeptic, the truth is always worth the hunt. Talk to you next week.